The night was alive in Zawanda City, the kind of night people talked about for months. The Okoro mansion shone like a palace, its crystal chandeliers pouring golden light over the marble floors. Expensive perfumes floated in the air, mixing with the smell of roasted meats and sweet desserts lined up on the long table. Laughter and music filled the hall as the city's richest families gathered, dressed in gowns stitched with diamonds and suits sharp enough to cut glass. At the very end of the table, almost hidden by the glow of gold-plated dishes, sat Amina. She wore a plain blue dress, simple and neat but nothing compared to the glittering outfits around her. Her hair was tied back in a modest scarf, her sandals worn from many walks across the dusty streets. She sat quietly, her hands folded on her lap, hoping no one noticed how out of place she looked. But eyes always notice. Whispers began to move like smoke around her. Some guests smiled politely, but their glances carried questions. Who was this girl with no jewels, no silks, no shine? Amina tried to stay calm, her heart beating fast. She belonged there, though no one in that room yet knew why. The servants moved gracefully around the table, their trays filled with sparkling glasses of red wine. The music softened, and the sound of whispers began to rise, sharp enough for Amina to feel them even though she couldn't hear every word. The women in glittering gowns leaned close to one another, covering their painted lips with jeweled fingers as they spoke. The men in fine suits smirked, shaking their heads as if something shameful was happening right before their eyes. Who invited her? One woman whispered loudly enough for three others to hear. Look at her dress, it must have cost nothing. Another laughed under her breath. She doesn't belong here. This is a table for people of class. The words floated across the hall, carried by cruel eyes that kept darting toward Amina. Every whisper seemed to slice into her skin. She kept her gaze fixed on the tablecloth, pretending not to notice, but her ears caught everything. The laughter, the hushed giggles, the clinking of glasses raised in mockery. It all pressed down on her like heavy stones. She clasped her hands tighter on her lap, her knuckles turning white. A part of her wanted to vanish, to melt into the floor so they would stop staring. But another part of her, small, hidden and quiet, whispered inside, stay still. Stay calm. They don't know the truth. Yet in that moment truth felt far away. What she felt most was loneliness, like sitting in the middle of a storm with no shelter. Each time her eyes lifted, even for a second, she met mocking glances that quickly turned into fake smiles. They didn't see her as a guest. They saw her as an intruder, a mistake at their golden table. And though she said nothing, her silence was heavier than all their words. Then it happened. The murmurs around her were nothing compared to the sound that cut through the music and chatter like a whip. Chisomo, the host's daughter, rose from her chair with a confidence that filled the entire room. Her gown sparkled under the chandeliers, diamonds catching every flicker of light, and her posture said she owned the world. Her eyes, sharp and proud, fixed on Amina as she raised her chin and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Excuse me, Chisomo said, her voice smooth but dripping with contempt. This is not a place for the poor. Please leave the table. The hall erupted in laughter. Some clutched their pearls and tried to stifle giggles. Others slapped their knees in mock delight. The sound wasn't just noise. It was a wave that crashed over Amina, shaking her very bones. Her fingers trembled in her lap, and her heart felt like it had shattered quietly into 1,000 pieces. She wanted to scream, to argue, to tell them that she had every right to be there. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her. Some amused, some judgmental, all convinced she was beneath them. A single tear threatened to fall, and she quickly brushed it away, hoping no one noticed. Her cheeks burned hotter than the chandelier lights above, and for a moment she imagined herself shrinking, becoming invisible, wishing the floor would swallow her whole. Yet even as humiliation clawed at her chest, something deep inside her stirred, a stubborn ember refusing to die. She slowly rose from her chair, clutching her small bag, her fingers pressing into the worn fabric as if holding on to courage itself. Every step toward the door was measured, every breath heavy. The laughter followed her, echoing in the grand hall like thunder in a silent night. And yet, beneath all that pain, beneath all the shame, a quiet voice inside whispered, "This is not the end." Not yet. Her heart ached, her body shook, but Amina carried herself out the dew. Her cheeks burned like fire, and her chest felt tight, as if the walls of the grand hall were pressing in on her. Every whisper, every stifled laugh seemed to cling to her skin, crawling under her dress, settling in her hair, making her wish she could disappear. She slowly stood, clutching her small bag as though it were the only anchor keeping her from falling apart. Each movement felt heavy, as if invisible hands were pressing down on her shoulders. The eyes of everyone in the room followed her every step. Some looked at her with faint pity, their lips pressed into polite lines, but most stared with amusement, curiosity, or thinly veiled disgust. She could feel their judgment like tiny daggers piercing her, one by one, while the golden light of the chandeliers above seemed to spotlight her shame. The laughter from before still echoed in her ears, louder now in her own mind, mixing with the soft clink of crystal glasses and the faint murmur of conversations that suddenly stopped when they noticed her moving. For a moment, she felt smaller than the smallest thing in the room, a mere shadow in a world that had no space for someone like her. Her hands shook slightly as she clutched her bag tighter, nails digging into the fabric. Her mind replayed every cruel word, every mocking glance, as if the entire evening had been carefully designed to crush her. She wanted to run, to vanish into the streets of Zawanda City, to be anywhere but here, surrounded by laughter that cut deeper than knives. But beneath the pain, a fragile spark refused to die. Though her body trembled and her heart ached, a part of her told her to keep moving, to keep standing, even when everything around her screamed that she didn't belong. With one last deep breath, Amina held her head just a little higher and stepped toward the door. Every footstep was heavy with humiliation, but also with the quiet, unspoken promise that this night, this crushing, unbearable night, would not define her. Before Amina could reach the door, a voice cut through the hum of whispers, the clinking of glasses and the lingering laughter. Calm, deep, and impossibly strong, it carried across the room with authority. No one leaves this table. The hall fell silent in an instant. Conversations froze, glasses stopped mid-air, and even the music seemed to falter. All eyes turned toward the source of the voice. There, standing tall with a calm but commanding presence, was Lawyer Malu. He was a man known across Zawanda City for his wisdom and fairness, a figure whose words could bend even the proudest hearts. In his hands he held a thick folder, bound in leather, as if it carried secrets that could shake mountains. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some faces paled, others stiffened. Chisomo's laughter caught in her throat, her smirk faltering as she realized this was no ordinary interruption. Lawyer Malu's dark eyes swept across the table, pausing briefly on Amina. There was no pity there, no hesitation, only recognition, respect, and the quiet power of truth waiting to be unveiled. He moved with a deliberate calm, stepping closer to the table. The weight of his presence was magnetic. Even the guests who had mocked Amina could not ignore him. "No one leaves," he repeated, his voice low but carrying the kind of authority that made even the boldest feel small. The room seemed to hold its breath. Amina froze mid-step, her bag still clutched tightly in her hands, heart hammering in confusion and hope. Could it be? Lawyer Malu opened the folder with careful precision, the sound of the leather sliding against the wood echoing in the silence. His eyes scanned the room, making sure every mocking glance, every scoffing smile, was met with the undeniable weight of the law and truth. In that moment the power dynamic shifted. The laughter and whispers that had crushed Amina moments ago now felt fragile, temporary, as though they could shatter with a single word. And then, the first W. Lawyer Malu slowly opened the leather folder, the soft creak of paper echoing in the stunned silence of the hall. He looked around the room, his dark eyes steady and calm, and cleared his throat. "According to the will of the late Chief Baraka," he began, his voice firm, carrying the weight of authority, "this mansion, this land, and everything you see here belongs to his only daughter, Amina." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the crowd, sharp and uncontrollable. Wine glasses trembled in their holders, some clinking against the table as if the sound itself could announce the disbelief. Chisomo's jaw dropped, her perfectly painted lips parting in shock. Her hand flew to her chest as though the truth had physically struck her. The elegant women who had whispered about Amina now turned pale, their gossip dying on their tongues. Even the men who had leaned back with smug confidence leaned forward now, their eyes wide, mouths slightly open, unable to process what they were hearing. Amina froze in the center of the room, her bag still in her hands. Her heart raced so fast she thought it might burst. The air felt charged, electric, as if the chandeliers themselves held their breath. For the first time that night, she lifted her head, her brown eyes meeting the crowd's in silent defiance. She had been mocked, humiliated, and made to feel invisible, but now the truth was her armor. Lawyer Malu continued, turning the pages with deliberate care. Chief Baraka loved his daughter dearly. He made sure that everything he worked for would one day belong to her. But lies, greed, and deceit hid this truth for far too long. The room was completely still. Even the servants paused in their tasks, frozen by the weight of revelation. Whispers of astonishment replaced the mocking laughter. Amina felt a strange mixture of relief and triumph wash over her. The girl who had been told she didn't belong, who had been pushed to the edge of humiliation was. Gasps filled the grand hall, sharp and loud, bouncing off the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The same faces that had sneered at her, whispered behind their jeweled hands, and laughed at her humble dress now stared at Amina with wide, unblinking eyes. Shock had replaced mockery, and the air was thick with disbelief. Some guests sank back into their chairs, unable to comprehend what they were hearing, while others leaned forward, mouths open, as if waiting for someone to say it was a mistake. Chisomo's hand shook violently as she held her wine glass, and before anyone could react, it slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The rich red wine spread across the polished marble like a vivid scar, drawing gasps of horror and surprise from the crowd. Her perfectly styled hair seemed to lose its shine in that instant, her carefully crafted pride crumbling in front of everyone. She looked at Amina, then at the floor, then back at the papers in Lawyer Malu's hand, unable to form words, unable to understand how the house she had paraded through as if it were hers was, in truth, never hers at all. The murmurs started slowly at first. Is this true? How could this happen? Then grew into a ripple that swept through the room. The women who had whispered about her dress now turned pale, their expensive jewelry feeling heavy on their fingers. The men who had scoffed at her presence suddenly looked uncertain, their confidence replaced by disbelief. Amina felt their eyes on her, some filled with fear, some with shame, but none with judgment anymore. She didn't smile, not yet. She only felt a quiet, steady power rising inside her. For years she had been mocked, pushed aside, and made to feel invisible, but now she was seen, not as a poor girl, but as the rightful owner of everything around her. The golden halls, the sparkling chandeliers, the long dining table, it all belonged to her. And the people who had tried to humiliate her were the ones left frozen, stunned. Lawyer Malu turned another page in the thick folder, his voice steady but filled with weight as he spoke, making everyone lean in closer. Chief Baraka built this estate with his own hands, he said, each word echoing in the stunned hall. He poured his sweat, his love, and his dreams into every brick, every wall, every piece of furniture you see here. Before his death, he made it very clear that his daughter, Amina, would inherit everything. But greed, lies, and selfishness buried the truth for far too long. The room was silent, except for the faint rustle of papers and the distant clink of a glass someone nervously set down. Amina's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her bag, but she didn't move. Her chest tightened and tears gathered in her eyes. Her father's name, long whispered with secrecy and sorrow, was now being honored publicly. It was as if his spirit had returned to stand beside her, proud and strong, reclaiming the dignity that had been stolen. She remembered him, the way he would hum while tending the garden, the pride in his voice when he spoke of her dreams, the warmth of his hand on her shoulder when the world felt cruel. All those moments, small and precious, now swelled inside her heart like a river breaking through a dam. The injustice she had endured, the sneers, the whispers, and the laughter, it all paled in comparison to the truth finally coming to light. Guests who had mocked her a moment ago now shifted uncomfortably, their arrogance crumbling under the weight of the story. Chisomo sat frozen, her eyes wide, realizing that the house, the land, and the legacy had been hers only in appearance, but never in truth. Amina felt a wave of quiet strength wash over her. She was no longer the girl everyone had dismissed. She was the daughter of Chief Baraka, the rightful heir to everything he had built with love and sacrifice. The tears on her cheeks were not just sorrow, they were a tribute, a connection to the father she had loved and lost. Lawyer Malu's voice grew firmer as he continued, peeling back the layers of lies that had haunted Amina for years. It has come to light, he said, holding the leather folder for all to see, that Madame Zuri, Amina's stepmother, deliberately hid the will of Chief Baraka. She made everyone believe that Amina had no claim to this estate, no right to the land, the mansion, or the legacy her father built. She told lies, spread rumors, and painted Amina as nothing more than a poor, unwanted girl. A hush fell over the room. The rich guests who had once whispered and laughed at Amina could no longer hide their shock. Faces that had carried smug smiles now reflected disbelief and shame. Chisomo's hand trembled, still holding fragments of her dropped glass. Her eyes darted between Amina and the lawyer, trying to process that the princess of the house had been living a lie. Lawyer Malu's words cut deeper than any insult ever had. While Amina was growing up, treated as an outsider, ignored and humiliated, Madame Zuri raised Chisomo as the daughter of this house. She allowed her to enjoy privileges, admiration, and respect that were never rightfully hers, while Amina, the true heir, was forced to stay in the shadows. Amina's hands tightened around her bag, but she didn't feel anger yet, only a heavy ache from years of betrayal. The memories of being dismissed, the nights she cried alone, the countless times she had been told she didn't belong, they all rushed back. Yet, beneath the pain, a spark of vindication grew. Finally, the truth was shining in front of everyone, unshakable and undeniable. Madame Zuri's face turned red, her carefully maintained composure unraveling. She opened her mouth to protest, but the weight of evidence and the presence of Lawyer Malu left her no words strong enough to defend her deception. Amina, the hall had once been pushed aside heavy with tension, now stood at the center of the hall, the evidence for not everyone just as a victim, but as the rightful owner of everything that the signatures bold and unmistakable, the seals shining like tiny beacons of truth. Witnesses had come forward, their statements clear and unwavering. Every document pointed to the same undeniable fact. Amina was the rightful owner of the Okoro estate. The mansion, the land, the table she had been asked to leave, all of it belonged to her. The rich guests who had once whispered and laughed now shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Their eyes, wide with disbelief, could no longer hide the truth staring back at them. Chisomo's proud posture crumbled, and her hands trembled as she glanced at the folder in the lawyer's hand. The table she had paraded around as if it were hers, the golden plates, the sparkling chandeliers, all symbols of wealth and status, were never hers to claim. Amina felt a quiet, steady warmth spread through her chest. For years she had endured humiliation, whispered insults and mocking stares. She had been called poor, insignificant, invisible, but tonight all of that changed. She had not raised her voice, she had not fought with anger, and yet the truth, plain and powerful, had spoken for her. Every step she had taken to this moment, the quiet strength, the patience, the endurance, had led to this victory. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had doubted her, and felt no anger, only a deep, serene triumph. The same table where she had once felt small, where every glance and whisper had pressed down on her like a weight, was now hers. The golden glow of the chandelier seemed to shine brighter, reflecting not just wealth, but justice finally served. Amina took a slow, steady breath, letting the reality sink in. She had been mocked, humiliated, and underestimated, but the night had shifted. The tables had turned, and the girl who was once pushed aside now stood at the center of it all, the Rai. Madame Zuri's face twisted with fury, her eyes blazing with disbelief and desperation. "This is a lie," she screamed, her voice echoing sharply against the marble walls. Her hands lunged toward the folder in Lawyer Malu's grasp, fingers trembling with rage, but he held it firmly, unwavering. Every guest in the hall froze, watching the scene unfold as the woman who had controlled the house with lies and deceit for so long now faced the unshakable truth. Her screams grew louder, rising above the shocked gasps of the crowd. She accused, she pleaded, she tried to twist the facts, but Lawyer Malu's calm presence swallowed her rage. "Madame Zuri," he said steadily, "the evidence is clear. The will is authentic, the witnesses reliable, and the law on Amina's side. Nothing you say can change that." The tension in the room thickened, pressing down on everyone like a heavy fog. Guests who had once laughed and whispered now shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, some wringing their hands, others leaning forward to see if the confrontation would escalate. Chisomo clutched her mother's arm, her own face pale and strained, realizing fully for the first time that all her privilege had been built on lies. Finally, guards were quietly called in, their presence adding a new layer of authority and control. Madame Zuri's hands fell to her sides, trembling as she realized that even force could not bend the truth to her will. She looked around, eyes blazing with defiance, but the weight of the law and the certainty of Amina's inheritance crushed her anger like a stone. Amina, standing quietly in the center of the room, felt a strange mix of pity and relief. The woman who had tried to humiliate her for years was now exposed, powerless and furious, and yet the girl who had once been mocked remained calm and steady. For the first time she understood the quiet power of truth. It did not need to shout, it did not need to scream. It simply existed strong and unbreakable, leaving the greedy. The case moved swiftly to court, and for weeks, every secret that had been hidden for years came into the light. Bank accounts were opened, showing transfers and ownership that proved Amina's rightful claim. Land titles were examined, carefully documented, each line of ink tracing back to Chief Baraka himself. Secret letters, once buried in drawers and hidden corners, were read aloud, revealing promises, instructions, and the truth that Madame Zuri had worked so hard to bury. Witnesses came forward, one by one, telling stories of what they had seen, what they had heard, and what had been done to keep Amina from her inheritance. Their voices, steady and unwavering, cut through the lies that had grown over time. Each testimony, each piece of evidence, painted a picture that could not be ignored. The room was tense, every word charged with meaning, every document carrying the weight of justice. Madame Zuri tried to defend herself, her voice shaking as she twisted facts and blamed others, but her lies could not stand against the mountain of truth. The judge listened carefully, eyes scanning the papers, ears attuned to every detail. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when justice would finally speak. When the ruling came, it was like a hammer striking down on years of deceit. The judge declared in a voice firm and clear that all property, assets, and the estate of Chief Baraka belonged to Amina. Justice, long delayed, had arrived. The words echoed in the courtroom, louder than any lie, louder than any scream, louder than any attempt at manipulation. Amina sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, tears of relief and triumph brimming in her eyes. Outside the courtroom, news spread quickly. People whispered about the poor girl who had been humiliated and mocked, only to rise and claim what was rightfully hers. The story became more than a legal victory. It became a symbol, a proof that truth, courage, and patience could overcome greed and death. Amina stepped through the grand golden doors of the mansion, and for the first time she did not feel small, invisible, or out of place. She walked slowly, letting her eyes take in the halls that had once felt cold and judgmental, the chandeliers that had cast mocking light on her humble dress, and the long dining table where laughter had once cut her like knives. But now everything felt different. She was not a guest, not an intruder, not a girl who had been pushed aside. She was the owner, the rightful heir, and the air itself seemed to recognize her. Her simple blue dress, plain and modest, had never felt so powerful. Each step she took resonated with quiet pride, a statement that she did not need jewels or silk to claim her place. The walls, the polished floors, the ornate decorations, they seemed to lean toward her, bowing in respect to the daughter of Chief Baraka. Servants who had once glanced at her with awkward curiosity or ignored her entirely, now straightened, their eyes wide, treating her with the recognition she had always deserved. Chisomo and Madame Zuri stood near the staircase, their faces pale and tense. Their whispers had turned to silence, and every glance they dared to throw at Amina was heavy with shock and shame. She felt no need to speak, no need to announce her victory with harsh words. Her presence, calm and composed, spoke louder than any argument. As she walked through the hall, memories of humiliation and whispers came rushing back, but instead of pain, they now fueled her sense of triumph. Every mocking glance, every dismissive word she had endured, had been powerless against the truth, and that truth was now hers, undeniable and complete. Reaching the center of the main hall, Amina paused for a moment, letting the sunlight streaming through the tall windows wash over her. She closed her eyes briefly and breathed in the moment. The house, her father's legacy, the life she had been denied, all finally hers. The girl who had once been. Amina approached the long dining table, the same table where she had once sat quietly, her head bowed, feeling every whisper, every mocking glance as if it were a weight pressing her to the floor. Now the atmosphere had completely changed. The golden plates, the sparkling glasses, the gleaming cutlery, all belonged to her, and for the first time, she felt the full power of that truth. She pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, deliberately, letting the room take in her calm, steady presence. No one dared to whisper or laugh. The same guests who had mocked her, who had glanced at her with disdain and amusement, now approached with careful steps. Servants placed dishes before her with trembling hands, their eyes wide and uncertain, as if afraid that even a wrong glance might anger her. Chisomo and Madame Zuri lingered at the side, their faces pale, their arrogance vanished, replaced by shame and disbelief. Amina took a deep breath and smiled gently. It was not a smile born of revenge or triumph over others, but of quiet dignity. She had endured years of humiliation, whispers, and scorn, yet she had risen without shouting, without forcing herself upon anyone. Her victory was not measured by the fear in their eyes or the tremble of their hands. It was measured by her own strength, patience, and unwavering belief in the truth. As she reached for a glass of wine, her fingers steady and assured, the room seemed to shift around her. The chandeliers above sparkled more brightly, reflecting off the golden table, but the glow no longer felt distant or mocking. It felt like recognition. Recognition that she belonged here, that she had always belonged, and that no lie, no cruelty could take that away. In that moment, sitting at the table with the weight of injustice lifted from her shoulders, Amina realized the full power of her journey. She had claimed her place not with anger, not with force, but with patience, courage, and truth. And as she looked around, she understood. Amina stepped out onto the balcony of her father's house in Kajuro Hills, the evening breeze brushing against her face. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and for a moment, everything felt still, peaceful, and right. She breathed in the cool air, letting the quiet strength of the hills and the city below settle into her bones. The mansion behind her, the home she had been denied for so long, now belonged to her completely. She remembered the whispers, the laughter, the mocking eyes that had once followed her. The girl who had been told to leave the table, the one who had felt small, humiliated, and invisible, now stood as the owner of everything her father had built. The tables had turned and justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. Her story spread quickly across Zawanda City and beyond. People whispered it in markets, shared it in homes, and repeated it in gatherings. The tale of the girl who had been pushed aside but rose to claim what was always hers. It became more than a story of inheritance. It became a story of courage, patience, and truth. Amina rested her hands on the balcony railing and looked toward the horizon. The city lights began to twinkle like stars, and she felt a deep sense of hope. Sometimes she thought the stones people discard, the ones they think are worthless, turn out to be the very cornerstone of a palace. She smiled softly, knowing her journey had only just begun, but that from this moment on, she would walk with her head held high, carrying her father's legacy, her own dignity, and a future she had earned.